I was wondering what I'm going to talk about. Good morning. How are you feeling this morning? As usual, we can make this a discussion. I'm going to kind of share thoughts with where digital transformation is going, particularly with the advent of what I think is kind of AI operating at a pretty mind-boggling level, the self-driving car. And the discussions I've been having with my team, with customers, with executives at customers, is what does a self-driving car really take to make? How do you build that much intelligence in, right? Hundreds of examples. You're the self-driving car, you're coming to a green light, and you're going through it. The other side is a red light, but the car isn't slowing down. What kind of math do you need? What kind of calculations do you need to say that maybe the other car hasn't read the red light, maybe they're intoxicated, what action should I take? Should I slam where somebody behind me slams into me? Should I accelerate, right? And don't we face similar decisions in our planning organizations? The forecast is too high, forecast is too low, suppliers having difficulty, et cetera. How do we react? And how many people does it take? Do the people really help each other? Are too many people coming in each other's way? How do you construct organizations? How do you construct processes? How do you have the supporting digital technology? That's what the exciting challenge for us as a group is, right? And so let's start the discussion then. Basics, right? If you've heard Sanjiv talk, it's all about variability and complexity going up. And I use the slide every year in some forms. And every year I can make this statement confidently that compared to last year, variability and complexity is actually higher. And there are various reasons why complexity and variability will continue to increase as you have these various trends that we're talking about. And I've listed just a few trends, but recently, probably at your company and many executive conversations we're having are relative to the tariffs. Right? What does it really mean to my supply chain? What does it mean to my planning organization, et cetera? And now the latest over the last 2 days or last few days is the oil crisis, which could be a crisis, not crisis, oil prices changing drastically. What does it really mean, right? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples, and just last 2 days, the conversations I've had with many of you are about this, right? What a mini celebrity on Instagram can do to change your demand drastically from one area to another. And I think there was an article about Gucci recently where they had a faux pas and suddenly last quarter was a disaster because they had made some mistakes and they seem to have pissed off their Instagram following, right? So big changes all the time. So variability and complexity is what you want to deal with. And I think the main thing is that if complexity is the problem, a natural trend is to strengthen our organizations. It causes certain problems. You add more and more people, you know the problems. One of them is that they come in each other's way, but really to manage more people, you need more hierarchies. Hierarchies are super dangerous when it comes to dealing with complexity because that's where gaming comes in, politics comes in, etc. So when you think about digitization of big enterprises, particularly in the area of planning, then you have to think about few things differently, and that's what I want to talk about. But in summary, you have to really think about shrinking the organizations, not because you're anti-people, because that's not the right technology to be able to deal with the variability and complexity that we are going to deal with. We are going to have to counter, right? More importantly, you have to think about the digital tools, the processes, the organizations, the measurements, all put together as one step. Historically, what we did was we said, I need a new process. I think about a process, I design it on PowerPoint, And then I give it to the digitization team and say, digitize it. First, it's too slow. Secondly, it never hits the mark. And then there's no room for continuous improvement, right? So a whole different approach needs to be taken, and the environmental's fertile. There's so much innovation coming that you know of, that I know of, and we can bring it all together. And I think properly thought about, properly approached, we can make progress much faster. We can move towards a self-driving car in your company. Okay? So just a little bit to, I don't intend for you to read the slide. I don't know the details of the slide either, but Igor is there to help me with the details if you have questions. Or if you have questions on it, talk to Igor afterwards. It's really the magnitude of the problem, and the magnitude of the problem is we're putting up a big number saying for every $1 billion of operations that you're doing, there's $100 million of inefficiency due to variability and complexity. That's a big number. Think about $100 million compared to the profit of $1 billion company. It's very large, right? Think about adding $100 million to $1 billion company, and let's say the company is trading at a PE of 20 or something like that, or a PE of 10, you're adding $1 billion to the market cap if you can get it all, right? I'm not saying you can get it all. This is the theoretical opportunity, but there's an opportunity to start approaching it, and we'll talk about what is required to be able to do that, okay? So covering the basics very fast, we said if variability is a problem, you need speed, speed, speed. The question is speed and what? If complexity is the problem, you need to see simple solutions when problems are occurring. And the point I want to make is if there's a problem occurring and inventory is going up, first, at what level of granularity do we look at it? As things get complex, we aggregate things. So if I'm the CFO, I'm looking at the total inventory number. If the total inventory number is fine, I'm happy. Is that justified? No. There's a lot of waste underneath it because we have a customer where their total inventory is roughly 60 days. They're a whole bunch of almost 20% of their SKUs have inventory of over 120 days, right? Highly excessive. It's indicating a problem. It's indicating a problem that when solved will bring about overall efficiencies, right? So you want to look at it at a detail level, but not too detail where it inundates you. So that's, again, a sign of intelligence. What level of aggregation do you want to look at any information from? And then when you start thinking of solutions, so let's dive deeper into that example with inventory going up in certain categories, right? I want to know, that was the what. I want to know it fast. I don't want to know it 5 days after it happened. I want to know it 1 day after it happens. And actually, in a great organization, I want to predict it before it's happening, right? So we'll talk about that. So now I detected that the inventory is up. The more important thing I want to know is not what happened, but why is it happening? That's intelligence, right? Why is it really happening? And simple descriptions will be the forecast was wrong, or they overproduced. Those are very simplistic discussions. They don't really tell me much. It's the next level. Why was the forecast wrong? Or what was really happening? What was the driver in the market that was making the forecast wrong? Was it a competitive issue? Was my product not being liked by the customer? Does the competitor has a promotion? Or is it a weather-related product where it's either too cold and I can't sell sandals, or it's too warm and I can't sell winter jackets, right? That's where I need to get to the precision where I can now start taking actions. And the first action I need to say is, if I don't do anything about it, what's going to happen, right? If it was a competitive issue where a competitor had a promo and it's gone, now my forecast will catch up, right? But for the loss that happened where customers bought the toothpaste from somebody else other than me, now people will come back to buying toothpaste and I'll be okay, right? So next is what we call as the predictive analytics of what's going to happen, and then the most important, which is the role of planning. What should I do about it? How do I react? And most of the reactions are very siloed, right? If I'm in charge of inventory and inventory went up, I'm going to whine and complain to the forecasting organization saying, hey, your forecast could be wrong, and then I will cut production, right? But a more intelligent reaction would be maybe to talk to the sales organizations to take actions, and then it cascades, the complexity cascades, because then I could say that those were the winter jackets that I'm now going to start taking a price cut on because winter is not so cold, and I'm going to promote out the inventory. What does it mean? What else is it going to cannibalize? A less intelligent organization will take that one action and be done with it. A more intelligent organization will understand all the collateral effects, which is what is it now going to cannibalize and what should I do associated with that. I could cut production, I could move a promo, I could move it to another market, etc. Right? So these are the core capabilities of dealing with variability, and as variability and complexity go up, the great organizations will be doing this well and will be making an impact of the $100 million that we talked about. One thing to point out is corporate social responsibility is becoming very important, right? Sustainability is becoming really important, and we have not seen anything yet. Next year, when we'll be meeting here, we'll see that it'll be more of a discussion topic. 5 years from now, we'll be talking about the role of planning, intelligent planning, super intelligent planning in sustainability. If you go to that slide, you'll see that many of the things that you're inefficient about are also attacks on the environment, are also attacks on our planet, right? And the $100 million we talked about, the reduction of even $10 million on it, most of the reduction improves your sustainability, right? There are various parts of sustainability in a company. One is what you buy. That is a product decision, right? I can buy a more sustainable packaging. I could buy things that have been procured more sustainably, didn't use child labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I start getting my own organization where I'm making a bunch of planning decisions, operations planning decisions. If I make them wrong, I use too much transportation. I use excessive capacity. Excessive capacity is a tax on the environment. I use excessive energy, and then I have a whole bunch of winter jackets that I don't know what to do about because I made the call wrong. And then what happens is that I have to promote them for 10 cents to $1. And people buy product for 10 cents to $1 and keep them in their closets. They need bigger closets, bigger houses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my conjecture is that all of us probably can do the single biggest thing and the single easiest thing for improving the corporate social responsibility of your company by impacting the total planning process, by dealing with complexity and variability in a more efficient fashion. So then, wow. So we talked about the 3 capabilities, which are the 3 W's, right? But associated with them, we talk about 3 disciplines. This is not new. This has existed for a long time, but now we're talking about new capabilities via intelligent digitization of the planning process, where we can truly enable these without adding armies of people and increasing the level of intelligence and increasing the intelligence of the granularity by which we can focus on the problems and thus start eking out more and more of the inefficiency. The first is what we call as a no surprises culture. When did you know first? We talked about the example of inventory in the beginning, and many organizations would know that the inventory is building 10 days after they started building. A good organization, we said, would actually predict that it's going to build because you were looking at the lead drivers, which is saying winter is not as strong, and thus the inventory will start going up, and you start taking actions before that. So no surprises, and this is a discipline that you make. So if I'm in charge of inventory, I should be held responsible, not for saying, why is the inventory so long? The first question you should ask me as a management team is, when did you first know? Right? And the when did you first know cascades. As it cascades, the organization becomes more intelligent because I didn't know the fact that the winter was going to be stronger. I don't know what the uptake of my product is. I'm in charge of just inventory. Well, then I need to be connected across silos such that the next time I know that information better. Right? Simple but very, very strong capabilities that you need to start thinking and say, is my organization really wired for this? The second is, of course, fact-based decision making. Who's going to not argue with that? The question really to ask is, when we made decisions wrong, what were the facts that were missing? Right? And keep increasing our capability, or what we call as sense making, such that we say weather is a very important fact that we need constant access to, right? And so you increase your sensors that you're using in your planning organization continuously, such that the basis is much more fact-based, and we are moving away from just historical forecasts saying that last year at this time I sold this much. We need to be asking what's different about this day this week compared to the same day last year, and bring those facts into the decision making. And I'm using one narrow example. This makes sense for all over, is saying, how did we make the decision? And this continuous improvement comes from point number 3. And these points, while I'm listed as 1, 2, 3, and while I listed them as the 3 Ws, they all come together, right? It's like the human brain. I don't know what I'm doing first, what I'm doing second, but I can somehow drive myself to work safely most of the days. And a lot of things happen, right? Similarly, an organization needs to get wired in that way, where all the 3 Ws are becoming part of our culture, but part of our infrastructure, which is the decision-making infrastructure, which is sensing what's happening in the market, making sense of why it's happening, predicting what's going to happen, making decisions, and then coming to what I believe is one of the strongest capabilities that has been in management principle for many, many years, but it's tough to practice, which is real closed-loop management, which is continuous improvement. It used to be called PDCA. Right now, the US Defense Forces use OODA or something like that. Very similar principles of observe, orient, decide, act, etc. It's all closed loop. Closing the loop is super critical for intelligence. That's how kids learn. How does a child learn how to walk? They do some things, they fall, they iteratively improve, right? So it's iterative improvement which is essential to growing intelligence. If you look at organizations, the iterative improvement is extremely slow. Google Maps, you'll see it improve all the time. Right? It's collecting a lot of data, right? So if it predicted that, so it started where you would have just one kind of time projection of what it takes to go from here to there. Then it started noticing that at rush hour, it's taking longer, right? And then all those iterative improvements start coming in, and that's the continuous improvement process. We're going to talk about how it needs to happen in a few slides later. Now, this is often frustrating to see how slow the progress of digitization is. And we come across these constraints. You probably come across these constraints. Due to these constraints, still 80% of the work is happening on spreadsheets, PowerPoint, email, right? All the quantitative intelligence is in spreadsheets. A lot of knowledge is in spreadsheets. Most of the assumptions behind the plan are in a PowerPoint, and then collaboration is happening via email, right? And you can't put it together. One of the things you can't do is really accountability. Why did we make this mistake? Not to nail someone, but for the purpose of continuous improvement, you need the ability of root cause of what really happened, who made a mistake, who was sandbagging, or who had poor judgment, or who had poor knowledge based on which they were making the projections. Okay? So with that, again, I don't want to go into some of these things. The last thing that I want to talk about is really point number 5, both point number 4 and point number 5, where data, for example, is continuously said that is a problem, and data is always a problem. You'll never have perfect data. But the answer is that today, with the data I have, I'm making some decisions. Question is, with the data I have, can I make better decisions? Yes. And can I be intelligent on an 80-20 rule where I can ask this 20% of more data that could make 80% of the difference? So when we see data efforts, they don't have much intelligence. You're trying to clean up all the data, right? You cleaning up all the data, for example, capacity data, lead time data, etc., is keyed into systems. And people are making judgments about that. We don't have to do that anymore, right? At a very large retailer where we're working, we're assuming and we're continuously improving the data because we're reading the transaction data. And you said this takes 2 days, but I've been tracking this. It really takes 1.5 days. Sometimes it takes 1 day, sometimes it takes 2.5 days, and this is the nuance by which it takes that. And this capability to improve data, again, by an intelligent approach, and the approach that we took last few years doesn't really work. And I've often used the analogy that many projects are slowed down because people say, I don't want to start running the algorithms till I clean up the data. And I always say it's like saying that I don't want to go to the gym till I have muscles. I'll first build muscles and then I'll go to the gym because otherwise I'll hurt myself. No, muscles are built by going to the gym. So you have to start running systems, and the systems need to be such that they start pinpointing where your data errors are, using machine learning, using other mechanisms of drawing inferences onto what the data needs to be. The data continues to improve, right? And this is a big initiative for '09, is to help you get the data right. And we want to play a big role in being your partners in overcoming not just that, but all the other constraints. Analysis paralysis really interests me because many times we are in a project where people want us to go live in 3 months, and it took them 3 years to arrive at that point, right? Through their selection process, through their negotiation process, right? The negotiation took 6 months, and essentially we were negotiating about $300,000 or $400,000, and they're really every day of loss is about $300,000, $400,000 in the operations. But it's okay for a company to keep burning money the same way. Many years ago, I worked with a steel company where they're having difficulty moving forward. And I think the value analysis was something like $30 million a year. And I said, if I take $30 million of your dollars and burn them the same way that I did burn them last year or a year before, it's just fine. Nobody notices. But if I found a new way to burn them, then people would be super upset, right? And to take time to make these decisions is really typical, and we believe there are ways to overcome that. And I'll talk about that, where we can move faster. I understand that risk-taking is not very good for companies. Risk-takers in companies are really not rewarded very much. And I think the technology has changed, where the cost of taking a risk is going down drastically. Okay, now this kind of says why I am very excited, and this is kind of why a self-driving car is possible. There's a lot of information, and similarly, there are a lot of sensors that are telling you what's really happening. Even the car has a whole bunch of sensors in terms of vision, in terms of braking, in terms of acceleration, et cetera, that it knows. It puts it all together. So similarly, as we're making artificial intelligence possible for super intelligent planning at your company, we have a lot of ubiquitous infrastructure. He was trying to teach me how to say that term. And I almost got it. With continuous improvement, it'll get better. And so there are 2 or 3 things I really want to point out here, right? So data is becoming possible. Huge amount of data can start coming in. And as the data comes in, we have the capability to store big data. You already have data lakes, but we have a more nuanced form of a data lake where we are keeping information that's coming in that might be of interest. We don't know if it's of interest, but there's a lot of information that's coming in that might be of interest. How do we know if it might be of interest? That decision is made through knowledge, right? You need to have some knowledge. That's where the enterprise knowledge models start becoming very important, right? The enterprise knowledge models can be deterministic, where you build them, and the knowledge is that we talked about the winter jackets. We said we'll take a promo on them. Then the question is, if I take a promo on these winter jackets, what happens? What does it cannibalize? And maybe as a store owner, I'm not just saying that it might cannibalize. It will also use up some of the spend dollars that the visitor to the store has, and they might not buy other things because they bought winter jackets that they didn't need because the winter wasn't cold, right? So there's many consequences. The question is, how do I build this knowledge base? Either I can start entering that, just like I did on my spreadsheets today, where somebody knew that and built some of these equations, or we can start inferring those. I think where we will move is we'll start inferring those. We saw what happened last year's promotions, and when we did this happened, that happened also. But the capability of coming to an inference is not easy. You still need a basic knowledge model that is cleverly constructed such that it's able to look at the big data and arrive at these inferences and continue to build the depth of knowledge that it really has. So on a base knowledge model, you're continuing to improve the knowledge quality, and that's what we're trying to do. So what we want is to be able to do that. We need learning algorithms like I indicated, and we need problem-solving algorithms, and the kind that we talked about. What we are noticing and we are excited about is many of you are now hiring your own data scientists, and we are excited about providing the platform where your data scientists can bring their own intelligence relative to your business, whether you're making coffee, whether you're Intuitive Surgical, whether you're making shoes as Nike or your Walmart. Your own data scientists will know more about your organization and your planning needs than we will. Our job is to provide the best infrastructure, work with your data scientists, where your data scientists are continuing to improve the knowledge model on our platform, continuing to improve the data lakes associated, making the data lakes more intelligent based on enterprise knowledge, and build algorithms where we have core algorithms that are more generally applicable. There'll be more better algorithms for your business, and that's what we want to enable, which is your self-driving car. So one of our big recommendations is, again, not new, which we call a planning and analytics center of excellence, right? We talked about the many spreadsheets, the many silos, et cetera. So 2 things are needed. We need planning excellence within a silo, whether it's supply chain management, whether it's sales planning, marketing planning, et cetera, right? And we need cross-silo intelligence. So we're talking of a planning and analytics center of excellence. This is not new. Many great organizations did that. We learned a lot from Samsung doing this in the early i2 days, Dell doing something like this in the early i2 days working with Dell. And we saw the very good planning organizations had some semblance of that. We've formalized that, and there's much more formalization that we can help you with as to what a planning and analytics center of excellence needs to be. It has two capabilities. One is capability development, right? Core capability development, and the second is doing things that are not possible in silos. That is, we call run, maintain, help. To run the process better is the second capability, right? So let's start diving into these capabilities. The first capability, which is capability development, has the following capabilities. It all starts with value analysis. You know, you'll hear the term value, and it's particularly tough for an Indian guy to focus on value because W and V's are not our strength. So value. We start, because what you want to do is at any time doing value leakage analysis, and all your strategies are based on what mistakes are you making, why are you inefficient, why did you not detect that this inventory is going to go up, what could you have done, right? So what we do is quarterly basis, annual basis, we look back and said, this is how we drove, but this is how we could have driven had we complete sixth sense, had we complete forward visibility, had we great intelligence and the coordination capability to work amongst our many silos, right? That's where that $100 million over the $1 billion came from. If we did everything perfectly, what would be the performance and what's the value leakage that we could stop? Right? So this capability needs to exist. Is a group that's continuously doing value leakage. Well, it exists in many finance organizations. It's not that structured, and its focus, as I say there, is on really benchmark its performance against plan that they measure as compared to performance against capability. Right? So it really helps sandbagging. If you ask me how much my capacity is, if my capacity was 150, I'm going to tell you 100, because then all I need to do is produce 100 and I'll be a hero. And when you're in trouble and you ask me to produce 110, I can produce 110, I'm more of a hero. Right? So if I'm measured based on my commitment of 100, I will sandbag, versus if somebody evaluated and said, your capacity is really 150, and you're producing only 100, and we are short on the market because you're producing only 100. This is one example, but it's all over. Sandbagging happens in sales, marketing, everywhere. So this is performance analysis compared to best possible, as compared to measurements, as compared to benchmarks. I'm not a big supporter of benchmarking, right? I think benchmarking is useful, but to say, hey, I did this last year, so I'm slightly better. And oh, by the way, my performance is better than all other competitors in inventory turns, in forecast accuracy, etc. No, it's not very meaningful at all. It's really, how could I have driven the best possible from point A to point B? And no point in comparing how bad somebody else drove. I know all the driving mistakes I made, and that's the value analysis, right? Once there's value analysis, the same team then creates digital workshops instead of PowerPoints, saying what could be if our system worked this way, and this is not theoretical. At one of our extremely large customers, we had 1 year of conversations where nobody was really, it was all being stalled because it was like we were building a house for them, and we were the architects, and some people wanted 3 bedrooms, some people wanted 2 bedrooms, and some people didn't even know what this house looks like. Is it a Mediterranean style? Is it contemporary, etc.? When we built a digital prototype, it took just 2.5, 3 months to build it, and their entire executive team flew to Dallas in their corporate plane to be able to sit down. All the sales execs, marketing execs, supply chain execs sat and saw that and say, that's what our future house looks like. Understand, let's go, right? As compared to a lot of conversation. So digital process prototypes are possible. There are a few things on that I want to highlight, that instead of a new process design on a PowerPoint, you're actually doing it on a digital prototype. More importantly, you're not just showing what the process will look like, you're showing the look and feel. You can show how the 3 Ws are going to drop out, when did you first know it's going to drop out, etc. That's where people get the idea of the house, but they get another idea, which was it was built fast. So if I was really looking for 3 bedrooms and I later wanted 4 bedrooms, that expansion is possible, right? Which goes to the next point, which is very fast sprints. This is becoming common, but what's happening is when we see sprints happening, some of them are quite meaningless, right? Because I want to do agile form of development, I want to cross a river. Sometimes a bridge needs to be built and it's the best way to cross the river, but what I'm doing is sprints where I have a small rinky-dink boat in which I'm taking people across, and it's not really serving the purpose. So any of these fast sprints need to be serving the purpose of a long-term vision that's aligned with the 3 Ws, that's aligned with the 3 disciplines that we talked about. And then the same team focuses on implementation planning. Wherever the implementation planning is occurring, it could be occurring in supply chain, it could be occurring in marketing, it could be occurring in the area of new product introduction. And then they go back to value analysis of what was happening and continuously improve. So it's not like traditional development of digitization where I deliver something and it's frozen and it remains the same. In fact, we were talking to an I2 customer who is still very happy with the solution we delivered 20 years ago, and they don't want to touch it because it works, right? In one sense, it's great. In one sense, it isn't, because the house was built 20 years ago. It's no longer the most efficient house, but they essentially don't know how it works. Nobody there really knows how it works. And that's what we want to change, is a continuous capability. But the center of that capability is really where the value leakage is. Continuously measuring where the value leakage is. And the value leakage also has to be digitized, where the value leakage analysis becomes more and more digital. Okay. Now I want to move to the next part. That was the capability development part. The next part is help run the process, the digital process. So this is a central team and it does 2 things, right? Let's say there's a supply chain planning organization. It's working with the supply chain planning organization to make sure they're following best practices. Or if it's a product organization that's determining product portfolio, they're working with their planning process to make sure that their planning process is following best principles, the 3 Ws, the 3 disciplines, etc. It's based on continuous monitoring of value leakage within a silo. But their more important function is enable the cross-silo discussions. So when inventory goes up, it's the supply chain team that's doing X, Y, Z. S&OP is a great example of a slightly enhanced cross-silo process, but it's slightly enhanced. But you go from S&OP to true integrated business planning, or as we call super intelligent business planning, where many functions are coming together. And when many functions come together, there's also a concept of measurement relief, right? Or I sometimes need more dollars. So you heard the Walmart presentation. At least in Walmart US, what would happen is that just before Christmas, I'm bringing in a lot of goods for Christmas, Christmas trees, gifts, this and that, and a lot of clogging occurs, right? As a supply chain organization, I can get it there on time to the stores, but my costs would go up. In few weeks, there's very high costs of transportation, expedites, etc. I need extra storage. But I could work with the merchants, and I could tell the merchants, hey, can I get 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks earlier, 4 weeks earlier? And there's a cost to getting it earlier. There's a cost to storing it earlier. So all those things need to be done. But one of the examples we use is that I'm a Christmas tree merchant. I bought 15 Christmas trees. Who is going to have the dialogue which will say, what if we had only 8 varieties of Christmas trees? We could get them to the store easier. Our costs would be lower. But yeah, the customer will be a little less happy because they didn't get the kind of Christmas tree they were looking for, right? What's the right trade-off? And this organization helps this make these cross-silo trade-offs that are so important to going towards your self-driving car. So then in summary, I continue to believe that variability and complexity will continue to grow, and traditional approaches just will not scale. So you have no option but to move towards what I call is super intelligent digitization, right? The second point is a lot of technologies are there. We need to figure out how to start using them, and we need to get good at them. Right? It's going to be a big competitive difference, not just your product, what product you make, what's the quality of your product, but as an organization, how agile you are and how you react to variability and complexity, right? Last point is, I do believe that this is not just the highest ROI digitization project. I also believe that it's probably one of the easiest sustainability projects you have, right? It can have super high impact on your sustainability footprint, and we are really excited to work with you in this area. I'll take a few questions. I have 4 more minutes, if they are, or I'm also available after the presentation. No more questions. Everyone knows how to do this exactly, and
the organization you were describing, are there companies that have that now?
yes, very close to that. And we'll be able to share some details. Actually, they're not our customers right now, but they were I2 customers. I mentioned Samsung in particular is very good at something. They call it the Global Operations Center. Many companies have terms like Center of Excellence, Center of Planning Excellence, etc. Okay. So they are companies that are doing that. Some of this exists almost in any company, again, this is prior knowledge. Pepsi, most of Pepsi companies, very strong finance function that does something very similar. In many companies, this capability is in the finance function.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, when I say this, it was the analytics part, but not the digitization part. There's some companies where it's coming all together, but the historic ones were traditional value leakage analysis, process improvement, setting measurements for next year, setting goals for next year, etc.
Building up the previous question, it feels like if you have such an organization that a lot of decisions are centralized kind of thing. I think on the other hand, you like to have the people in the field making quick decisions from a total enterprise perspective and help them in doing that. So how is the trade-off between this more central team and the people in the field reacting quickly on things what's happening?
Yeah, that's very aligned with what I think should happen. First, thanks for being here. Good to see you after a long time. I think when you go back here, if I could, It doesn't matter. When you look at the circles, the silos are really important, and not taking away the independence of the silos, where everything that should be done in a silo should be done there and should be done in an excellent fashion. But then there are capabilities, for example, that a central team could help them with, particularly in just organizational development, right? Making sure sometimes a silo, a supply chain function will say, hey, I know how to run a supply chain. I don't have people who are real experts in planning. So the central group is building, educating people on the 3 Ws, et cetera, the basics of planning, to be able to understand how to do a value leakage analysis. So you move people, right? And we see best companies moving people from planning, from supply chain to sales, from sales to marketing, et cetera, such that they know what is involved in the other functions. So the strength of both are important, but yes, many functions, it's like you throw a small rock into water, the bubbles go, the waves go only certain distance, they don't impact the others. Those things should be, certain variability should be taken account into the silo. Certain others require integration, but they're usually not taken on because there are no mechanisms. So that whole thing, that process should be designed, and you shouldn't over-centralize. That's not part of what I'm preaching there. Am I answering your question?
Yeah. Sanjiv, you also mentioned Internet of Things and digitalization, so we will...
I'm going to come here because of the light.
Okay. So we will also see digitalized assets all over the supply chain, so transportation, in production, and so on. This will enable us to understand in real time what is happening in the supply chain. And this brings me to the thought that multiple companies, businesses, players will be involved. So we're talking about transportation companies, the manufacturers of the equipment, packaging material manufacturers, and so on. Will you also think that this will impact how planning will be done? There will be cross-enterprise planning more and more based on all these digital assets we have providing us the information, and can we generate value out of that as well, so cross-enterprise PACE organizations?
Totally, I don't, let me take that because I think I don't, cross-enterprise value is large, and I think it's becoming easier and easier to capitalize it. Now the question really is, are you going to do value leakage analysis, and how to remove gaming and negotiation, right? Currently we are in a lot of conversations with customers who want to do more with their suppliers, but it gets very awkward where there's a confusion between, is it for negotiation, where I'm going to give you more information, my forecasts are going to be better, you better give me less cost. And we haven't really figured out how to remove all that. And that's where self-servingly we would say, get somebody like '09 involved. Let us be the calculator of the value leakage, such that we can come and tell the customer and the supplier that, hey, you're gaming each other too much. There's a lot of value leakage occurring. As an independent source, we're making some recommendations. I think that's one option, but it's not the only option. Right? If we go away from, we do a true value leakage analysis and say, this is the value leaking, and if we fix it in these ways, then there's a mechanism to share the profits that are coming out of that. I think we'll see more and more of that. I just talked about the Global Operations Center. I see one of the inventors of that in the audience, which is Wanjun, who worked for Samsung and started the Global Operations Center there, which is an amazing contribution. It's great to have you here, Wanjun. Okay, thanks so much. I'll take more questions outside if needed. Thank you so much.